School districts across Texas didn't want the TEA's accountability ratings from 2 years ago released because the agency changed its calculations with little notice. The districts feared their scores would suddenly go way down. In many cases, they were right. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, reaction to Thursday's release and what it does or doesn't tell us about Houston area schools.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Also this hour, why hospitality workers in the Houston area want their minimum wage increased to $23 an hour. Plus, from bobblehead hoarders at Astros games to a driverless car that wouldn't drive, this week's non-expert panel weighs in on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a conversation with composer Missy Mazzoli. We'll start with the news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Good morning. Coming up this hour, wages for hotel and airport workers, bobblehead hoarders, and composer Missy Mazzoli. But first, the Texas Education Agency Thursday released school and district accountability results from the 2022-23 academic year. Those grades had been held up for 19 months over a legal battle between the TEA and 120 school districts who said the agency made changes in how the scores were calculated without sufficient notice that would lead to lower grades. An appeals court this month lifted an injunction and dismissed the suit. Several Houston area school districts did, in fact, receive lower grades than they'd earned the year before. Among them, Houston ISD saw a 16-point drop from the previous year, from an 88 to a 72. Galveston ISD's score dropped from an 84 to a 69. Among other Houston area school districts, Conroe, Cy-Fair, Katy, Montgomery, Pasadena, and Pearland ISDs all earned Bs. Alief, Channelview, Columbia, Brazoria, Fort Bend, and Spring Branch districts earned Cs. Aldine and again Galveston ISDs received Ds. To discuss, we're joined now by Bob Sanborn, President and CEO of Children at Risk, and Judith Cruz, Texas Assistant Director for the Houston region at the Education Trust. Good morning to you both.
Morning, Craig.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Judith, you were on the HISD Board of Trustees when the state took over the district in 2023. Do these numbers, in your view, accurately reflect where the district was academically when that takeover occurred?
Actually, they do. And I went back to look at some reports from early that spring because based on my memory, I do remember looking at our interim assessments and kind of where we were trending and what was shared with us as board members at that time. So that was the first year that the district had implemented phonics-based instruction for reading. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard currently the debate about the science of reading, right? How we teach reading. Are we teaching a balanced approach? Are we teaching phonics? And that was the first year of implementation of that. It was also the first year that they were piloting in less than half of the campus what we call high-quality instructional materials, so much stronger curriculum. Again, it wasn't even half of the campuses. It was a pilot year, so you won't see the results of either of those initiatives in year one, right? It takes time for the students to be able to demonstrate that mastery with those new initiatives.
Bob, Children at Risk publishes its own annual rankings of Texas schools. We've talked with you about those. How do they differ from what the TEA offers?
Well, I think ours are a tad bit more rigorous than what TEA does. But I think this was part of the argument for TEA in the whole beginning of this was that they wanted to make it rigorous, yet they did it right in the middle of during the period when people were taking the test. And so the whole point of this lawsuit was that, hey, you changed the rules in the middle of the game. But rigor is a good thing. As a parent, you want a little bit of rigor there. You want to get an idea of how those schools are doing. And in the end, when you looked at what happened, I mean, it's old news now, but you saw what you expected, which was that the pandemic had an impact on these grades. And so there's going to be some lower scores.
How did Houston area schools and districts specifically compare in your rankings in 2022-23 to what the TEA released on Thursday?
Yeah, about the same, right? I think we saw some noteworthy things around the state in terms of some districts that did way better than we expected. But in the Houston area, it's really about the same. I think we saw some school districts, much like the TEA did, that were doing a little bit better, some that weren't doing well. I also think what's noteworthy is that there are a number of school districts that got an F around the state, and among them Beaumont and Fort Worth. And it'll be interesting to see what the state does with that, because the whole idea is that if you get an F and you've had these schools that have done poorly over 5 years, that they could take over. So now you have Beaumont and Fort Worth ready to be taken over. It's been such a popular decision in Houston, I can't, not really, but I can't imagine that happening, but it might.
Judith, due to the delayed release, we already have the following school year's numbers. So is there any value to now seeing these ratings from 22-23?
Unfortunately, the best value is to see it as close to real time as possible, right? We need data on how students are doing to be able to make decisions, not just as parents, but schools, school district leaders, even the state legislature, right, is determining so much of what will happen in schools, and especially with funding. And we need this data to be able to know where to allocate resources and how to do it in the best way possible. And as if we don't have that in real time, it makes it very, very difficult. It's still good to have, because you want to be able to measure year over year how schools and students are doing. So we do need that data, but I hope that as we move forward, that we are able to have it when it is released.
Bob, now that districts have had time to adapt to the state's new ratings calculations, should we expect different results when the current school year's numbers are released?
Yeah, I think looking at the next year, which we've already done at Children at Risk, we are seeing the significant improvement, right? I think we're coming out of the pandemic. We're certainly not out of it completely with some of the pandemic learning loss, but things are getting better. I think what has been holding us back, though, is the fact that for 2 legislative sessions, schools didn't really get an increase in funding to try to deal. Even after the pandemic, they didn't get that. They just got the federal pandemic money. We're seeing the impact of that. But overall, things are getting better, right? And I think, we're going to move on to the next topic, which will be, at some point, vouchers, which everyone will be talking about and school districts will be talking about. But I think that at this point, things what we see is the data is going in the right direction by and large.
I do want to ask you about vouchers, but
okay,
just hang on a minute.
Sure, no problem.
Judith, another thing that happened in the legislature just last week, the Texas Senate passed a bill that would keep school districts from being able to sue TEA over school ratings in the future. What do you make of that proposed bill?
I haven't had a chance to read the bill myself, so I really don't want to opine on it. What I will say is that it's good to have a healthy debate on how we're measuring students and what that can look like for schools and school districts. But the most important thing is for us to know that we do have a fair and reliable instrument to be able to measure students, that we are able to see over time whether large groups of students are improving, right? We spend $70 billion in the state in education every year. So we want to make sure that how we're investing that money really does make a difference for the students. That's the purpose of our schools and our education system, is to make sure that we are preparing with the most foundational skills if students are learning, reading, basic math, and that we're also preparing them for life after high school.
Bob, as you teed up, as long expected, the vouchers bill has now passed through the legislature. It's headed to the governor's desk. With vouchers coming out of Texas, will private schools also eventually receive ratings like this from the TEA, and should they?
Well, I think the state legislature currently in its current format is going to say no, right? These are independent schools. They shouldn't be judged on how they're doing because it's a different deal. However, one of the things that we have in the bill, though, is this idea that every school that accepts these vouchers is going to have to use a nationally normed test. So there will be scores. They won't be the same as STAR tests, but we'll be able to look at that. And our hope is to be able to look and really to let parents know how these kids are doing, because they could decide, these private schools could decide who's admitted or not. So it's not just anyone could go. And so they're going to pick and choose, but we want to make sure if they're doing the picking and choosing that they're doing a good job. We know that there are going to be schools, and there is a rule in this voucher bill that a school has to be in operation 2 years. So there can't be new schools popping up. But there are going to be schools that have been struggling for more than 2 years that say, hey, this is our chance. We're going to double in size. And so we want to make sure that parents are doing the right thing by sending their kids there.
Bob Sanborn is president and CEO of Children at Risk. Judith Cruz is the Texas Assistant Director of the Houston region at the Education Trust. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Craig.
You.
And up next, hospitality workers say Houston's seeing more visitors, leading to more work for them, but not more pay. what they want to earn, and what it would mean for the industry. As Houston Matters continues. This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Houston First Corporation says more than 54 million people visited Houston last year. That is 6% more than the year before, nearly 10% more than before the pandemic. But many of the workers who greet and serve those visitors say their wages haven't kept up. That's why a union representing hospitality workers at hotels and airport restaurants and banquet servers at the GRB is calling for a $23 minimum wage for workers connected to tourism. Michelle Gray is a barista at a Starbucks in Bush Intercontinental Airport operated by OTG Management. Francesca Caraballo is the Texas chapter president of the Union Unite here, Local 23. They're both with us now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Michelle, let me start with you. How does what you earn at this airport Starbucks compare with the cost of living?
It doesn't compare. It's less than the actual cost of living. Currently now I make $16 an hour. And rent increases every time. Food is going up. It's hard. It's extremely hard.
How long have you, if I may ask, have you been earning $16 an hour there?
It's been almost a year, almost a year, a little less than a year.
Why do you argue you should be paid $23 an hour?
We should be paid $23 an hour for the simple fact that, like I stated, my rent now is $2,100, okay? I have a family of 8. I have 4 children, 2 dogs, and a husband, okay?
Okay.
And food is very, very expensive. You have energy bill, you have water bill, you have all these costs and that are constantly increasing, yet our salary is still the same. It's just not balancing out. So in order to live and at least try to survive comfortably, we need $23 an hour.
Francesca, of course, you're Local 23, so I'm sure that influences why you're calling for this. It's branding, I get it. But also, I'm wondering why else you see that number as a fair minimum threshold.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, right, that Houston has seen record numbers of visitors coming to the city, and they're passing through the airports. They're staying at the hotels, right? So we're seeing, like, record profits. So wages have been stagnant, especially since the pandemic. So we see that, like Michelle said, rent has gone up over 20% in the last 5 years, right? I think we even see that the living wage for Harris County just went up to 21 something, I believe. So we feel 23 is a good start, basically, for our members to actually survive and provide for their families.
Some business owners would argue their costs have skyrocketed too, so they're not necessarily seeing profits to match the increases in visitors. Hotels have to absorb those costs. So how do you respond to that argument?
Well, I mean, like we said, these are not, small companies. This is Hilton, Marriott, right? OTG Management is the biggest concessionaire at the Bush Airport. So the workers are literally seeing the money roll in, and meanwhile they're back home trying to piece together their paychecks, trying to put food on the table, living check to check. And a lot of our members actually do have second and even third jobs.
Michelle, I'm also curious, more visitors, regardless of anything else, has got to mean it's just busier day to day.
Extremely busy. So therefore, your workload has increased. And we are constantly serving people on a daily basis. The prices has increased as well. So as far as profit, they are profiting. And they're profiting off of us and the excellent customer service that we provide in the industry to all our, clients and people that come in every day.
Francesca, have you spoken to anyone from the city of Houston about what you want?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we just had a big hospitality workers summit on Wednesday night, and where we had over, dozens of members there, and we had city council members present and address our members. City Council members Joaquin Martinez, Tiffany Thomas. They spoke and shared their support for our fight. Even Tarsha Jackson, she couldn't make it in person, but she even made the effort to tweet about it and share on social media that she stands behind our fight and our members.
And you're preparing for contract negotiations later this year. Are you threatening to strike if you don't get the minimum wage that you want?
Well, we're right now we're really focused on just organizing our membership and learning more about what are the different needs that folks are looking to fight for in the contract. So that's just where we're at right now.
So you're not saying yes, you're not saying no. You're just kind of staking out a position at the moment. Michelle Gray is a barista at Bush Intercontinental Airport. Francesca Caraballo is the Texas chapter president of the union Unite Here Local 23. Michelle, Francesca, thank you both very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much for having us.
And joining us now is Tucker Johnson. He's a veteran of the hotel and restaurant businesses and also teaches at the University of Houston's Conrad and Hilton College of Global Hospitality Leadership. Tucker, good morning.
Good morning.
What are you seeing in the economics of the hotel industry specifically these days?
So the hotel industry, it's interesting when I was listening to the ladies that just talked. There's a difference between the hotel industry and something like the concessions at the airport and the convention center, things like that. The hotel industry is kind of flat right now. So revenues haven't really increased over last year, at least for the first quarter. But costs have continued to increase, and demand is kind of uncertain right now as we roll into summer, especially international demand. That's been down a lot. So costs are up, revenues are kind of flat. So hotels in particular is a little more challenging than it might have been in the last couple of years.
I mentioned the stats from Houston First Corporation suggesting more visitors rolling through town. Does that not automatically result in more revenue for hotels?
It probably does, but revenue does not equal profit, right? So it's actually better to have less visitors at a higher rate than more visitors at a lower rate when you look at actual profit. And, the biggest concern I would have right now with hotels in particular is if demand does slow down, then you lose that pricing power. And so each one of those stays could become less profitable.
Couldn't hotel owners just charge more per room and as a result then be able to afford a higher minimum wage for workers at hotels?
So the problem with that, too, is, maybe an individual hotel might start charging more, but you'd need all of the hotels to start doing that, because if one hotel charges more and the rest of them kind of keep their rates where they're at, people will go to different hotels, and then they can't get together and do that because that would be collusion and that's illegal. So it really, the hotel industry in particular is an elastic demand industry where if demand is there, you can charge more. If demand isn't, then the prices are going to go down.
You said airports, it's a little bit of a different situation. How so?
Well, I think with airports, you have a captive audience. They have to purchase what's at the airport. They don't have the option. So if somebody's traveling, they can pick from different hotels. They can go to a different area of the city, whatever it is. But when you're in the airport, you just are in the airport. So I think the airport, it seems like a place where they do have pricing power. They would have the ability to increase prices. I've noticed prices increasing all over, where I go. The airport used to feel like a ripoff, but now it actually seems reasonable because other prices have increased so much at, restaurants and around town. So I think at the airport, they have the ability to charge more. I think people expect to pay more at the airport. And if you can charge more, then you can pay your people more, because a dollar increase in price is going to be $1 more of profit, right? So you don't necessarily want to serve more people at the same price. You want to serve more people at a higher price, and that'll flow through to the bottom line.
You heard our previous guest talking about the fact that workload has increased for them, even as pay has not. Is that just about more people coming through airports and maybe more people at hotels, or is it also about fewer people working behind those counters and desks?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if you look at the stats, at least in the hotel industry, which I'm a little more familiar with, we're not back to pre-pandemic employment levels. People are having to do more with less. That's just a fact, and it's something that owners have looked at and increased that efficiency. So there is definitely an argument to be made that if you're doing more work, you should make more money. The issue that I think the owners would look at is that their costs have increased, just like the lady who was talking from Starbucks about her rent and some of those other costs that have gone up. Ownership, right? Their taxes, their insurance costs, the cost of food, linens, all of those things have gone up too. So they're hitting that issue with pricing as well.
Tucker Johnson is a hotel industry veteran who teaches at the University of Houston's Conrad and Hilton College of Global Hospitality Leadership. Tucker, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Just ahead, bobblehead hoarders and driverless cars that won't drive. This week's non-expert panel weighs in on intrigues in the news, on the good, the bad, and the ugly as Houston Matters continues. A lot can happen in a week. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it downright ugly. When faced with intriguing developments in the week's news, we turn to a rotating panel of non-experts to parse the good, the bad, and the ugly of it all. On today's panel, Natalie Arsenault, the president of Arsenault International Consulting, Raul Ramos, associate professor of history at the University of Houston, and Frank Billingsley, co-host of Hello Houston, weekdays at 11 on News 88.7. Natalie, Raul, Frank, welcome to Houston Matters.
Thank you, Greg.
Panel, Houston Sports Talk 790 host Chris Gordy took to X last weekend to call out some Astros fans for, well, we'll charitably call it economic ingenuity. See, last Saturday was Josh Hader bobblehead day at Daikin Park. The first 2,000 fans were to receive the giveaway. Gordy, however, observed Astros bobblehead hoarders. He said were getting out of hand. He noted watching an older family of 5 enter Daikin Park, get their Hader bobblehead, then exit, come back in, and get more bobbleheads. He says they handed them off to someone stuffing them into bags. While there's no re-entry into the ballpark, if fans purchase additional tickets, they can get back in. And since the bobbleheads sell on eBay for a lot more than the cheapest seats at the park, well, now you can see this is capitalism at work. As Gordy notes, it cheats other fans, some of them kids, from getting any bobbleheads. He writes, "How much of a loser do you have to be to do this?" At last check, several of the bobbleheads were being offered on eBay for prices ranging from $40 to $75. A local radio host admonishes Astros fans who are hoarding bobbleheads to resell on eBay. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Raul Ramos, start us off.
Well, look, I have kids. I have 2 boys, and I remember they get very excited when there's bobblehead day or there's any kind of giveaway at the Astros games. And I think we learned early on, after a few times when we take them and we'd show up maybe 10 minutes before the game starts and there are none to be found. And you're like, okay, I guess the deal is we need to show up a little bit earlier. And so on days where there were giveaways, we got our act together and managed to get one. In fact, I have one of them right here in front of me right now. It's the Reed and Nolan Ryan dual bobblehead from a few years back. And the kids love them, and they're nice to have. That being said, yes, it's very frustrating as a parent when you can't get one of those for your kids. They do leave bummed out. You know, people are exploiting this, and they're exploiting it because I think there's a little bit of the nature of baseball is unique in this case because it does have a culture of collecting and of selling on a secondary market baseball cards, for instance. Having a rookie baseball card of a player who becomes a Hall of Famer becomes very valuable, especially if you can get it signed, right? A signed one of these rookie cards is like gold, especially if it's mint condition, especially if it's still in its wrapper and all of this. And if I'm not mistaken, eBay started because of collectors selling, I don't know whether it was Beanie Babies or something like that, that spurred an entire industry where people now make their livelihoods on eBay. This is capitalism. Again, it's a supply and demand issue. Just increase the supply and we'll all be happy. And, it won't be as valuable anymore.
All right, good, bad, or ugly, Natalie Arsenault.
So I'm torn. I'm also very much so in a non-judgmental mood, which is rare. So I'm not feeling very judgy today. I have a couple of takes. One is that we don't really know. What if the family of 5 was coming back through because they have 5 other kids at home and they couldn't afford for the other kids to come, but they wanted to buy, there's all kinds of reasons why people do what they do. We also know that people hoard toilet paper. So, come on, it's a thing. The pendulum swings far and wide. But I agree. Baseball is kind of built in the capitalistic way, everything from how the players get paid to the merchandising. And to Raul's point, you could mitigate this by simply creating more supply, which would then obviously make it less profitable or to try to resell these things because there's more on the market at that point in time. So that's also a capitalistic kind of approach as well. I do think I can see the frustration in parents. You buy this ticket, you're bringing your kids, you're trying to create memories, you get there and there's nothing there. But the lesson, I guess, is the early bird gets the worm, maybe?
Okay, good, bad, or ugly, Frank Billingsley.
Oh, I see this as bobble trouble. Makes my own head wobble. It's all three. It's good in that it speaks to the popularity of the Astros. We have a team that everybody wants collecting, so that's good. It's bad because some of these kids get left out when there aren't enough bobbleheads to go around. And it's ugly because it's greedy. It's just greedy. And I respect that there might be 10 more kids at home or whatever, but the kids that are seeing this as an example, I think it's the wrong example. I think you figure out a way for everyone to share the bobbleheads if that's really what's going on. But this way to make a living, a door prize, basically, it's a little sketchy to me.
People line up for different treats at McDonald's, for instance, wanting to get all of the different Happy Meal toys.
But shouldn't they just be able to go through once? Right. Shouldn't there be a way that you've come through once, you don't get to go through twice and maybe a third time?
You think with technology these days they would know that. Maybe they already biometrically know who's been there. So
and this is why I'm not afraid of AI, because humans always outsmart the technology. We find ways. You're like, oh, your email address, then we create 10 emails. Or, there's this barcode. We create new barcode.
Is it a good lesson for the kids? We don't know the family of 5 or the people of 5. I don't know how they were. But is it a good lesson to say, here's what we're going to do.
Yes.
We're going to get those bobbleheads. We're going to go in there on a cheap ticket, and we're going to stash them away. We're going to put them on eBay and make some money. And you're like, what about keeping them? Nope, we're not keeping them. We're going to sell them.
Right.
Now, maybe, as you say, maybe there was a legitimate reason that they needed to. Maybe they were raising money themselves for church. That's
could
possible.
be. You never know.
You never know.
Or it could just be pure greed and capitalism, to which point maybe this will spark the next industrialist entrepreneur who creates something great, all from this bobblehead.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's good, bad, and ugly. It's all categories.
It's turning tragedy into opportunity, right? They walk away knowing they can create the next eBay platform, Bobble Bay, or whatever you want to call it.
Panel, some love autonomous vehicles, some don't. My guess is Becky Levin Navarro's moved from the former to the latter category. She was in Austin making use of one of Waymo's self-driving vehicles when that vehicle stopped driving. As she shared on the socials, the driverless taxi came to a sudden stop underneath an expressway at the merge of 2 lanes while she and other passengers were locked inside. As other cars and trucks whizzed past them, the group contacted Waymo customer support and were informed there was no way to move the car remotely. So they asked if the company could unlock the doors. They were told not without a precise address. As the Cron's Ariana Garcia reported Monday, when Navarro threatened to go live on TikTok, the car unlocked. And after the group walked some distance away from the vehicle, it suddenly roared back to life and drove past them. Navarro ultimately posted clips of the incident online saying, quote, 0 stars for Waymo. Waymo spokesperson Chris Bonelli, though, tells the Cron the passengers themselves pressed a pull-over button and could have exited at any time by pulling the handle twice, once to unlock and another time to open the door. He says the company's rider support team did not remotely unlock the door for them. A driverless vehicle in Austin stops driving and locks its passengers in for more than 5 minutes, or maybe they just did that to themselves. Is this good, bad, or ugly? Natalie.
Okay, so this is probably some form of one of the many thousands of biases that people have, but I in no way want a driverless car. So when I saw this, I was like, see, this is why we don't need driverless cars. I think if you entered into like, hey, we're going to use this driverless car, I think you, first of all, you're accepting some of the inherent risks of being in a driverless vehicle. I also think you should take time, and maybe it's something they can add to the platform, I don't know, where they actually explain, kind of like when you get on the plane, they tell you all the safety features, here's how you exit, here's your safety device, all the things. Maybe there needs to be something like that with the vehicle so that people acknowledge the fact that they know how to open the door, unlock the door, roll down the window, all those things, right? Again, I'm in a non-judgy place right now, so I don't know good, bad, or ugly. It's probably a bit of, well, I don't know if anything about this is really good other than the lesson learned for the folks involved. But I think it's probably a mix of all of them simply because, you know, Waymo is getting bad press over this. Well, I guess it's good for the TikTokers because they probably got a couple of extra views and some viral attention now. So that's the good part for them. And I think it's ugly because it brings up a lot of concerns for me with the driverless vehicles. And I know people always say, oh, you know, that's a 1 in 1,000 trillion chance of things like this happening. But I do with, you know, the ability to keep my vehicle from being hacked, even if it's some teenager who wants to play a stupid game on somebody and they hack your vehicle and then they're driving you off course of where you don't want to go and you're locked in or whatever the case may be. So I think there's some things that we still need to work out with the driverless vehicle situation. We're not there yet, and anyone who gets in one should understand all of the inherent risks they are getting ready to take by getting in the vehicle.
Okay, good, bad, or ugly, Frank?
I tell you what, you have very good points because it's, to me, scary. I mean, I think it's bad. I don't know if I ordered a ride share and it showed up driverless, I wouldn't get in it. And so many things can go wrong. I mean, this was just inconvenient. I find it hard to believe that if this stopped on the road, people weren't trying to get out of it, not just once and then twice, but 4 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, get me out of this car. And apparently that didn't work. Now, imagine if you're on a date and you're a driverless car and it stops somewhere and one of you wants out of that car and can't get out of that car. That could be a really serious, ugly situation. So whatever company this is, they have a lot to fix.
Okay, good, bad, or ugly, Raul?
Well, taking a clue from you, Frank, I'm going to say the oh no Waymo situation here is...
And Waymo trouble.
Waymo trouble than I think we're asking for. I'm going to take a contrarian view on this, and I'm going to take the side of Waymo here for a second and put it in terms of how our society is changing, whether we're open to change, how we engage change, the challenges with change. Look, think about it. The number one conversation in Houston pet peeves is traffic and driving in Houston by a factor of 200, right? That's all anybody wants to talk about. And so here we have an opportunity to spend fewer resources on automobiles, on roads, on 2-car garages in every house, on repairs. I feel like we're in a time where we're starting to see hidden taxes everywhere, and we pay so many hidden taxes by individual car ownership that we often don't calculate between insurance and getting cars for your kids and being worried about your kids out on the road. I think there's an opportunity here, and there's a transition time in any technology. We're experiencing that, and I think there'll be times to take advantage of that. I feel we should be transparent about it. I'm pretty sure that Waymo has video of the people inside the car that can just tell you what's happening, and they're either not showing it or letting it blow over or whatever. I also know that I was talking to my friend Ed, who lives in San Francisco, and lives in a neighborhood that has Waymos all over, and He's been taking them, and he actually is satisfied. He's been in a situation when I described him what happened where the car sort of stopped and it wouldn't turn left because there were too many pedestrians, and it just was sitting there for minutes. And they eventually did get out because they're like, well, we're not getting anywhere. But he felt the car was making the safe choice by not threatening pedestrians and not putting the passengers in danger with oncoming cars and so forth. I think what we are is at the bottom of that trust arc.
We're going to get there, whether I want it or not. And it's odd, as a person who does digital transformation, I'm like, no, but we'll get there. I don't know if we'll ever get rid of the people part and I certainly hope not, even if they're just as passengers helping the driverless cars drive or something. I don't know. But I think we have a long road to go, and we are, to your point, Raul, at the bottom of the trust.
Who's gonna drive the flying cars?
That's what I thought we were going to be in, right? The Jetsons, I feel so lied to from the Jetsons.
Yeah,
when I watched the Jetsons, I was like, we're going to be flying.
I want my jetpack. I want to be able to just jump in the air and fly around.
I do.
Right.
Natalie Arsenault is the president of Arsenault International Consulting. Raul Ramos is an associate professor of history at the University of Houston. And Frank Billingsley co-hosts Hello Houston weekdays from 11 to 1 here on News 88.7. Natalie, Raul, Frank, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
In Lars von Trier's 1996 film Breaking the Waves, a newly married couple finds their relationship tested after a devastating accident. What follows is an exploration of love, sexuality, and fidelity. The film was later adapted into an opera by composer Missy Mazzoli and librettist Royce Vavrick. The Houston Grand Opera is presenting it now. In a moment, Mazzoli tells Houston Matters producer Joshua Zinn about the work, but first we hear from the opera's lead performers.
Hi, I'm Lauren Snowfer, and I'm singing Bess McNeil in Breaking the Waves.
Hi, I'm Ryan McKinney, and I'm singing Jan Nyman in Breaking the Waves.
It's really hard to distill Bess down into a quick snippet, but she is a fairly young girl, probably in her mid-20s, who's been raised in a very strict religious society. And at the beginning of the opera, she and Jan are getting married in a very happy way.
Yeah, Jan, he works on an oil rig, and is kind of an outsider in this town where he's met Bess. He's a little older than Bess, probably we think maybe in his early 30s or something. Kind of seen a little bit more of the world maybe than Bess has. He comes across as kind of a little more open-minded guy, sort of thrust into this small town conservative community.
So I know that this opera is based on a film by Lars von Trier. I'm curious, did either of you watch the film? Did you take anything from that film, or did you try to avoid it and try to approach the characters in your own way?
Well, I watched it a few years ago, and then when I came here, I didn't rewatch it, but I felt compelled to rewatch it a couple weeks ago while we were already in the process, and it was so interesting to watch it again while I was immersed in the opera, because I just took so many more things from it, and it just made so much more sense in a way. But I think it's an incredible movie, and the opera kind of does take a liberty here or there, but it generally tells the same story, I would say.
Yeah, I did actually try to avoid it for a long time to kind of make my own judgments on the piece as it is. But then, we talked about a lot of it in rehearsal, and I ended up watching it a few weeks ago too, and really, really beautiful film. But I actually think the opera is kind of its own thing, its own standalone piece, and does treat a lot of it very differently. And of course, the film has a lot of stillness, a lot of silence, a lot of room for you to interpret what's happening in terms of the character's subtext. And the opera, the music, Missy's music is so evocative and really tells a very specific story from a very specific point of view that doesn't maybe have quite as much room for emotional interpretation as the film might have, but I think in a beautiful way it actually is gripping in a way. I think for me the film is a little more nebulous.
Yeah, when you first started tackling this piece and looking at the music, what about it stood out to you? Was there any one element or anything in the music that you were like, oh, that's interesting, or I haven't seen something like that before, or even just something that kind of captured you about it?
Well, the size of my role was one of the first things I noticed, but we talked about in the rehearsal room about how every scene has its own musical language. And I think that's true. Missy uses motifs in a way that, I don't know, I'm not used to contemporary composers using in such a way. I think she uses them kind of all over the place, and they're very recognizable, and you can hear a morsel that you've heard 5 scenes prior and your ear really recognizes it. So it's all just very cleverly interwoven and really tells a beautiful story.
Yeah, I think Missy has a really clear musical voice, and that comes through. And yeah, like Lauren said, there's a lot of kind of leitmotifs in it. It actually is very Wagnerian in that way. There's moments I feel like Britten. Really her way of using color, using different keys at the same time to kind of evoke emotional color is really, really amazing.
Well, and obviously another part of opera is the language, is the words, the libretto by Royce Vavrek. What stands out about the way that you're saying the things and the words that you're saying as these characters?
Royce has a really current way of writing opera. So the way that he uses language is really just kind of the way we would talk, which is pretty unusual in opera, I would say. So, there's some curse words and there's a lot of like colloquialism in it. It just feels very relevant and easy to connect to.
It's very in your face in a way, and I think he is purposefully sometimes shocking in a way that I think works really well in this piece. It does have moments of real poetry too, and beautiful moments of calling back to previous moments in the piece that I think work really well, and that Missy picks up on and uses musically too. I think it's a great libretto.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Joshua Zinn, and you just heard my conversation with Lauren Snofer and Ryan McKinney, the leads in Houston Grand Opera's production of Breaking the Waves. Now we'll hear from composer Missy Mazzoli about how she approached translating this story from film to the opera stage.
So what's interesting about Breaking the Waves is that there are a lot of scenes in the movie that are not in the screenplay, that they must have improvised or developed, and there are a lot of scenes in the screenplay that didn't make it into the film. So Royce was working with this document of the original screenplay, but then we also were watching the film all the time to figure out why these scenes were cut and why these things were added, and it was really fascinating. But at the end of the day, opera is such a different medium than film. It can do a lot of things that film can't, and it can't do a lot of things that film can. So we embraced that and really accepted from day one that this was going to be a very different piece of art than the film. We're very faithful to the story, but I think opera can amplify the psychology of the film in a way that film can't, just because in opera there's so many different layers.
Mm-hmm. What is this opera about? I know the premise, I know the plot of what happens. This woman gets married very young, and the guy has an accident, and then she sort of has this, I guess, sexual exploration. But what is this really about for you?
Yes, great question. Yeah, so that you've described the plot, but the real point of the story, the film, and the opera is so much deeper. As you mentioned, this young woman, Bess McNeil, who's growing up in a very strict Calvinist community in the 1970s on the Isle of Skye, meets the man of her dreams. She falls deeply in love. They have this amazing love story for a couple months, and then he's injured in an accident on an oil rig. And then she comes to believe that she can heal him by being with other men. And Von Trier brilliantly crafted this so that it allows us to get at these deeper themes about what does it mean to be a good person. Von Trier has said that this is a film about goodness. And yes, you can get focused on the sort of, this idea of a female sacrifice or the violence or the sexuality in the story, but that's missing the point. I think the more interesting thing is that everyone in this story is trying to act in a way that is most good, and yet still everything falls apart. Mm-hmm. So how do we get from point A to point B? That's the opera. And that to me is so interesting. And that's why I've been able to, it took me 3 years to write this. It's, premiered 9 years ago. I've been living with this story forever, and it still feeds me.
So let's talk about the music. When you were approaching this musically, was there a specific soundscape you were trying to create? How are you thinking about what instruments to use and what sort of techniques you wanted to apply to this?
Early in the process, we took a trip to Scotland, to the Isle of Skye, and I was just really struck by the landscape of Scotland. I'd never been to Scotland before, and it's a landscape unlike any other. And so it has this really incredible combination of like softness and then violence. So you'll have like a beautiful meadow that then plunges off a cliff into the sea, and then these crashing waves, and then all these like sheep peacefully grazing. And so my initial thought for the very first chord, the very first thing you hear in the opera, is to portray the landscape of Scotland. And this is a rare thing for me. Like, I don't usually take direct inspiration from nature. A lot of composers do, but I just don't as much. But that was a really important thing for the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then after that, once we sort of set the scene, it's really a psychological exploration. So every note you hear is informed by the character's psychology. And it might contradict what they're saying or what they're expressing, but it's really illuminating what's in their head. So we have some strange instruments in the percussion section. There's an electric guitar, which sort of appears every time our lead character, Bess, talks to God. The sound of God is the electric guitar, which is fun and also weirdly jarring in the context.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, just because you are a living composer who's writing music, and there's a lot of discussion in whatever you want to call it, art music, classical music. There's a lot of hand-wringing about the state of that art form, and how much deference do you pay to the old music versus the new stuff. How do you see yourself fitting into all of that? And how do you sort of perceive the landscape of what we consider classical music?
It's interesting because I'm in my 40s, and I spent the 80s and 90s and 2000s driving around the suburbs, listening to the radio and going to electronic music concerts and punk concerts and playing in punk bands. And so my musical tastes are super eclectic, and I feel that this medium is like working in classical music with this huge palette of instruments is just an incredibly modern and expressive way to operate as an artist. And I think opera, to me, at its core, is very modern. And I get sort of frustrated when people automatically assume that it's this outdated art form, because at its core, opera is just telling stories driven by music. So I think that this work is not inherently outdated or tied to any one era in history. I think it has the potential to tell the stories of today in a really vital and moving way. And I think that all the hand-wringing, we have to sort of keep it in perspective that when I go and work in Europe, there is no hand-wringing. I go to an opera at the Paris Opera, and that place is full of young people with crazy makeup and crazy outfits, and they're talking about it, and they have a habit of going to the opera. I don't think that's because people in France are inherently more artistic or open to this. It's money. It's their government funds the arts. So they're able to offer cheap tickets. They're able to have a huge variety of programming. And when in America, you have these companies that are suffering financially, and they can only do 3 or 5 shows a season. And then, so people aren't in the habit of going. And then all these questions come up of if we do a new work, then we're displacing Puccini. And then it becomes this either or, which I feel I don't want the classics to go anywhere. I want to be able to go see Bohème and La Traviata and all of these older works. I think they're very important, but I don't want that. I want the new work to exist alongside of it. I see myself as part of this long tradition of opera composers, and no part of that needs to go away. But it becomes very hard when you have such a limited platform, and that is particular to this country.
So one of the unique things about this performance is that this is, I believe, the first time it's going to be recorded professionally, yes. And so this will exist in perpetuity in that way. How do you feel about that?
It's amazing. It's such a gift. I'm so grateful to HGO for being open to this and for taking it on, because, it sounds crazy, but it's really hard to get these larger format works recorded, whether it's an opera or an orchestra piece or a musical. I mean, it's very difficult. But that's how we consume 99% of music is through recording. Yeah. So I'm really grateful that this piece can live on. It premiered 9 years ago, and we've just been trying to get it recorded, and so it's finally happening.
Composer Missy Mazzoli there talking with producer Joshua Zinn about her opera Breaking the Waves. We also heard from singers Lauren Snofer and Ryan McKinney. Breaking the Waves is on stage this weekend and next at the Wortham Theater Center. And that'll do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll is our technical director. On Monday's show, why you don't want to get caught credit card skimming at a gas station in Smith County, and other examples of tough on crime policies that are so tough they've caught just about everyone off guard. We'll learn more about from the Houston Chronicle's Eric Dexheimer. We'll also seek reaction from Harris County District Attorney Sean Tier. Also, do we really need all this smart technology? Just how connected should the fridge really be? We'll discuss with Houston Chronicle columnist Dwight Silverman. I'm Craig Cohen. Have a great weekend. Then join us Monday for those and other Houston Matters.